Welcome into the Tottenham Depot. I am your host, Andrew. You can follow me at A Stetka. You can follow us at Tottenham Depot. This is episode 189, and Tottenham Hotspur are your J League World Challenge champions. Hang the banner, raise the trophy, put it right next to the Audi Cup. We're all celebrating here at the Depot. We've got Scott alongside for this week. He is at Scott G. Bird. Scott, what's going on with you, my friend?
Just been celebrating the big win all weekend. Another trophy to add to the cabinet. So always a wonderful way to celebrate a Tottenham win. Hopping on a podcast and talking about our triumphs. No tribulations here at Spurs, other than maybe that own goal in the match against Vissel Kobe, which was a bit of a howler, right? But like you said, we got the trophy, and Richarlison carries it proudly onto the departing airplane, and we roll.
We roll indeed. We are recording this fairly early on a Sunday, earlier than usual. We're just trying to get the information out to the folks. So there won't be much Olympics talk on this one. The U.S. women play later today before we record. Kind of excited about that. In fact, my wife was even like, "Hey, let's watch that USA Germany U.S. women's match today." And I'm like, "Sweet, my wife wants to watch some soccer with me. I'm kind of into that." So we're gonna get the podcast out and go enjoy the rest of our day and week. But plenty to talk about. Few transfer murmurs. We're also going to play a little game with Scott. Scott is our transfer. He always wants to talk transfers, and as the listeners, the longtime listeners know, I'm just not really a big transfer guy. I'm the let me know when they sign on the dotted line, and then we'll talk about it. But we're going to do a little speculation. We're going to play a game with Scott and put him to the test of 5 words or less. That's coming up. But before we do that, Scott, you mentioned it, a 3-2 victory over Vissel Kobe in a friendly in Tokyo. I did not watch this match live. I watched some highlights. Glad that the fellas are kicking on. I'm not. Everyone knows I'm not a huge preseason person, but I enjoy seeing the lads do the work, put the work in the preseason on this Asian tour. I think that's kind of cool. They will play another friendly on Wednesday against K-League All-Stars, and then play next Saturday against Bayern Munich. What is rumored to going to be a Harry Kane-less Bayern Munich, at least to start. But any big takeaways from the tour right now? They've moved on to Seoul from Japan. There hasn't been too much news other than the signing, which we're going to talk about. But any big takeaways from the tour itself thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I, like you, did not watch the match live. I think being we have both spent so much time throughout our Tottenham fandom on the west coast of the U.S., I've gotten my ass out of bed super early enough times for actual matches to the point where when we have these super early morning international friendlies over in Asia, I'm not interested in putting myself through that, right? We do enough of that, so I did not watch it live, but I was able to watch the highlights. I think we're really seeing our first team, and by that first team, I'm talking about guys like Sonny and Brendan Johnson and Kulusevski and Madison. Don't have much of our back line when we're talking about the first team quite yet, but Pedro Porro would be included. They're all kicking on and look to be quite ready to take on the season and perform at a high level. And then, as we've talked about quite a bit, our youth is looking like actual depth. And again, these are friendlies against far less competitive teams than what we'll be playing against. So I do think it's very important to stay grounded through all of this. And of course, I'm talking about the Mikey Moores and the Will Langshires and the Tyrese Halls. Archie Gray, I think, is maybe at a little bit of a higher level than those folks I've mentioned, but I'll include him as well. I think we just need to stay grounded as we, go through all this excitement around this youth, because again, we're not playing at the level of competition that we'll be playing week in, week out in the Premier League, but still super exciting to see some of these youth players prove to be actual depth for the squad and continue to get reps under Ange Postecoglou, and a couple of them new signings too like Gray that I've mentioned, but also Bergwall, who I haven't mentioned yet, looks to be a real player. So exciting stuff, but again, lots more to come, I think. Transfers included, which we'll get to. But overall, it looks like the squad's having a good time. It looks like they're continuing to build their chemistry and their cohesion. And we all know how important next season is going to be, not only in itself, but for the progression of the project. And so I think, overall, preseason is accomplishing everything that it is intended to accomplish. So good stuff.
The progression continuing this week in the transfer market as well. Congrats to Ryan Sessegnon, by the way, finding his way back to Fulham, signing as a free agent there. That's something of note that happened this week. Also, it sounds more and more like a Brian Heel deal is on the verge of being official. Going to sign with Girona. Technically, it's the kind of a weird math that they're going to do. They're going to re-sign him to an extension at Spurs and then loan him to Girona, with them having the priority to sign him long term, but then he'll also be able to sign anywhere else if they don't want him. It's just a weird way to get Brian Heel out the door and on his way back to Spain, which I think we all kind of expected. And then the PEH deal, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, was made official this week. We talked pretty at length about PEH on last week's pod, so if you missed that, head back to last week's podcast and listen to the PEH discussion. But of which Scott offered like very minimal. You were just like, thanks for the memories, right? I mean, that was
Like
pretty
the
much
club,
all.
baby. Just like the club's official tweet. We both said thanks for the memories, Pierre, and all the best. And again, like I said on the last show, I love Pierre and Højbjerg. I think he was really important to the club in a number of different ways. But it was also time to move him on. And yeah, all the best. We don't need to get into that again, though.
In terms of the incomings, there is a big one, and I say big one not for the near term, but for the future. Tottenham Hotspur have signed 18-year-old South Korean winger Yang Min Hyuk, and I'm gonna pray that I pronounced that remotely correctly, from Gangwon FC. This is a young South Korean winger who has been compared to Heung-min Son, of course, just because of the same nationality and everything. They just announced this deal, obviously, with them getting to Seoul. It's kind of all very serendipitous, and the club is there. They're going to announce this signing. Yang is going to stick with his club through the rest of their season and join Spurs in January. I want to shout out our good friend Matty Hayes, who's at Matt Hayes THFC, who put together a long thread on this who he calls a wonder kid. And obviously there's a long way to go. This is a player who's 18 years old. He's more one for the future than anything, but has started in all 25 of his team's games this season. Has, I believe it's 8 goals and 4 assists so far. Just an interesting signing for me. And again, one that the club was obviously keen on. And there's a lot of those South Korean parallels, and the club is getting this deal done. It's good, obviously, on the field, but also off the field, to keep that connection in the market as well, from just a pure business standpoint too. What are your thoughts on this signing for Yang Min Hyuk?
I think it's great. I think there's some special things happening in Korea from a footballing perspective. And, I think Sun probably precedes some of that and maybe really kickstarted it, right? But again, some really good things happening. I think their national team is attracting names like Jurgen Klinsmann, and it didn't quite pan out, right? But we all know Jesse Marsch was floated around that job. So Premier League level talent from a management perspective is interested in the national team job over there, and they're really developing talent at the grassroots level, better than anybody else in Asia, in my opinion. I think that used to be Japan. Interestingly enough, we just left Japan for Korea, right, as a club, but Korea is doing some special stuff, and I'm not surprised at all that we're continuing to pay attention to what's happening and tapping into it. I think this kid could be very special. The one word I would use to highlight him is audacity, and I say that in the most positive of ways, right? But some of his touches and strikes that I've seen him take, very few people would have the confidence to try and take, right? And so I think he just looks to be somebody who backs himself and believes in himself and his abilities tremendously. And his initial interview with the club was very humble. He's looking to obviously focus on Gangwon FC right now, as he'll be there until January of next year, and says he has some unfinished business or things to accomplish still at Gangwon, which again is always super positive. But he also said his goal is to make an immediate impact at Spurs. He's not coming to to prove himself and develop. He's coming to play right away. And I also thought it was very interesting that he said he hasn't spoken with Sonny at all yet. In that initial interview, I would have thought Son would have been the driving factor in attracting him to Spurs, but I share that because it tells me that if we don't need Sonny to recruit or attract this top level talent coming out of Korea, it speaks highly to the club and Ange Postecoglou and the project and the mission itself, right? And obviously Sonny will be heavily involved in this young man's integration into the squad. But yeah, we continue to make our mark in South Korea, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm really excited to see what this kid can do.
Yeah, already plenty of photos on social media popping up of the two of them, and just like I said, if nothing else, this is a really good rollout by Spurs. They're like I said, they're in South Korea. They're signing a young South Korean player who's very highly thought of. Going to bring him in January, integrate him into the team, I'm sure. And this is the fourth signing of the window, technically, and the third one who is 18 years old. Like
Awesome.
if ever you need to know what Tottenham Hotspur's mindset is this summer, it is get younger and get a little bit more dynamic. So I think that's all a very positive thing as well. Again, transfer stuff, I like to talk about it when it's done, like this one is. You like to talk about it in speculation. Do you want to get into a little bit of 5 words or less on some of the other names that are out there and rumored, or do you have anything else on Yang before we move on?
No, I don't have anything else on Yang. I do want to just jump back to Brian Heel for just a moment.
Yeah, sure.
I do think it's interesting that it's only a loan. I think a lot of that is because of the state of the financials across Europe's 5 major leagues, right? But Girona, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Could be Girona, could be Girona. They are part of the city umbrella and they have money, without a doubt. And I'm curious as to why it's only a loan, right? I haven't been the biggest proponent of the Brian Heel signing, and we both know this, right? And probably a lot of that is because my bias towards Eric Lamela and the fact that we gave up Lamela plus way too much cash for Brian Heel. I think that's the one miss from Paratici. And not to say that Heel isn't super talented. He just never fit the mold ever from day one, right? So it was a big miss, but I'm very curious to see or to know why, and I won't ever find out, right? But I'm curious to know why it's only a loan and not a permanent transfer. I wonder if that was Girona refusing to pay up front or looking to elongate the process financially, right? We'll never quite know, but the Brian Heel experiment just continues to frustrate me. We've got to actually move him on. So I was a little bit disappointed to see that it was only a loan, but nonetheless, I'm sure wages have cleared and Girona will be still can't figure out how to say that name. Girona will go with we'll be taking over his wages, which will help. But I'd really like to see him move permanently at some point. I think it's certainly time.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. These things always, whenever Tottenham tend to finagle the books, I'm never really that worried about whether it's a loan or whatever else. I mean, wasn't the Eric Dyer deal initially just a loan? But it's like we know that it's a permanent moving on. So I think even isn't the Højbjerg deal even a loan? I believe,
but they have an
like
obligation
all of
to
these.
buy.
Yeah, with an obligation. So none of when it comes to the bookmaking stuff, none of it really bothers me all that much. But yeah, I agree with your sentiment about the Brian Heel thing. It just never seemed to click. It never seemed to be a move that was going to work. He never seemed the right size, honestly, for the Premier League and the way he wanted to play. He always seemed undersized, and didn't seem like he was going to be able to have, if you're going to be that undersized, you need to have more pace, and he didn't have either to be able to play at this level. So
Well, and
for the effort.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't want to take anything away from him. Like I said, I think he's incredibly talented, and I also think the Spanish league is a fantastic league that's full of talent. So I think it's important to highlight when I say things like he's not a fit for the Premier League. It's not some sort of holier than thou opinion of the Premier League versus La Liga, but just the raw facts that the Premier League is played at a very fast pace and at a very physical level. And we hear guys come in all the time from Spain, from Italy, from Germany, and say, "Holy shit, my head was spinning that entire appearance because of the differentiation in the leagues, and it just didn't work out. But yeah, he'll do really well in Spain. I really think Girona is an excellent fit for him. As I said, they're part of the city organization and they're in the Champions League. Another example of someone leaving Spurs and falling upwards, we could say, right? It tends to happen, unfortunately, but he is now competing in the Champions League, and I expect his new club, it's not official yet, but his new club to continue to bring in new pieces and continue to elevate themselves as an organization. So yeah, it's going to be a great move for him, and I wish him all the best. But yeah, let's get into to 5 words or less on these transfers. Let's do it.
All right, so this is fully. I'm copying to this now, and he's not going to hear this or know about it. But I have a buddy who does a radio show back in Baltimore, where I'm from, who did this segment the other day on his show related to the baseball trade deadline, and brought up a bunch of names and was asking his producer and his co-host, give me 5 words or less on this player. And the idea is, your thought on them going forward. And I think we're going to do this with some Spurs players going forward, but today we're just going to do it on non-Spurs players as a potential transfer into the club, either this summer or going forward. So you are the guy who follows this stuff, and you're really into it. So I'm going to ask you to give me the 5 words or less. We'll post these up on our socials at Tottenham Depot, and then we'll just kind of have a discussion about whether or not it's a fit for Spurs. So the first name we have for you is the winger from Wolves, Pedro Neto. Give me the 5 words or less on Pedro Neto.
Yeah, I've got 3 words for you here: dynamic, injured, and overpriced. And I think that probably encapsulates my opinion of that signing efficiently and shortly.
That's interesting because, he's always been a player. Yes, the injury issues are known, and they're like that's fine. But he's always also been a player that you like because of the Premier League experience, and
Sure.
that he's reliable in that sense. I wouldn't have thought about overpriced. That is an interesting element of it. But I honestly, when it comes to Spurs at this point, I think the overpriced part of it is never something I'm super worried about, just because I know kind of where Spurs are from a money standpoint, right? And that doesn't concern me as much. Like, I certainly don't want Spurs just going out and spending willy-nilly on everyone. But if you're going to spend on someone and it's going to be a little overpriced, like, that's not something that's going to bother me at this point. So Scott's 5 words or less on Pedro Neto: dynamic, injured, overpriced. All right, fair enough. I feel you on that. I'm not going to give 5 words. I'm going to just let Scott. This is Scott's baby. We're going to let Scott cook.
Been waiting my whole life for this moment.
Yeah, I know you have, and I'll challenge you when I feel the need to. Let's move on to a midfielder from Rennes, Desiree Doué. What are your 5 words or less on Desiree Doué?
Yeah. So unproven, dynamic, dribbly, young, and competition. And I think it's important for me to elaborate on the competition piece. What I mean by that is there is a heap of clubs who are interested in him, and I don't believe Spurs are at the top of that pecking order.
You're going to have to give me those words again. Unproven, young,
dynamic, dribbly, and competition.
So you don't think he's a guy that would come right in and be in the 11 for Spurs if he were to be signed?
I wouldn't say that, because I'm not quite sure, but I think I maybe have some hesitancy with young talent out of the French league. Now that can be proven wrong quickly. Let's look at Jeremy Doku, for example. Came in and smashed it day one at City, right? And he's one of those young, unproven, dribbly, pacing wingers out of League One. So who knows, right? He could come in and be part of the squad day one, but that's where I use that word unproven, is we're not quite sure. Now, would I like us signing him? Absolutely. I'd be thrilled about it. But I do think there's an element of unprovenness, if that's a word, associated with this young lad.
All right, fair enough. Let's move on to a striker that Spurs have been linked to, not even just this summer, but going back even further, and that is Brentford's Ivan Toney. What are your 5 words or less on Ivan Toney?
Yeah, and there's going to be a connection to my 3 words on Pedro Neto here, but proven, poacher, expensive, confident, and mistake. And I use the word mistake because of a mistake that we all know that he made in his past, right? And I'm one to give people second chances and opportunities to learn from their mistakes, but he did make a significant mistake that I think has to be considered.
Yeah, that's fair. I am actually gonna. I said I wasn't gonna chime in with 5 words. My 5 words on Ivan Toney, and I'm gonna do it. You're doing it a little bit differently. You're just giving me 5 words. I'm gonna make a sentence out of it. I'm gonna say, not worth the headache. It seems Ivan Toney seems like a headache. Not, and I don't mean personally. I don't know the man, but it seems like there's just a lot of baggage there, and I could be wrong about that as well. But just on the surface, from everything we've read and seen, Toney seems like the headache, and I would tend to say not worth it for me, but that's just me. Who knows? He could come in here, and I also think that he would be more of that competition for Richarlison. He seems like a Richarlison light almost in terms of just output. So if you've got two of the same player, wouldn't you rather just have one really good one rather than 2 B- level players, C+ level players?
The only thing I would say there is he is a true poacher, right? Where Richarlison has played a lot of his career out on the left, especially at Everton, right? So I think if we're looking at a number 9 who is proven in the Premier League to put in a decent goal output, and can, frankly, I don't have anyone else to say it, but just put the ball in the back of the net when he's in the box, I think he fits the mold. And that's where I said maybe Pedro Neto is a little bit overpriced, because if we're going to pay 60, 70 million for a guy like Pedro Neto, I'd rather us invest that in a number 9 who has put the ball in the back of the net consistently in the Premier League. But yeah, I'm maybe a little.
Oh, I lost you. Lost your audio there. There he is. He's back.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Yeah, no, I just said that. I think Ivan Toney is probably hotter on my list than he is on yours, but I understand.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point. All right, let's move on to another midfielder, Aston Villa's Jacob Ramsey. This has been a rumored deal, like in swap move. I think with Lo Celso, right? But if Ramsey were to come in, what are your 5 words or less on Jacob Ramsey?
3 words I've got for you. I couldn't come up with 5, but underwhelming, filler, and versatile. So I give him credit in terms of his versatility. He can play as a 10, he can play out wide, he can play as an 8, probably, right? Maybe even potentially a 6. But my opinion was that we were interested in him to get Lo Celso out in a lot of ways, right? Aston Villa said this is somebody we're interested in swapping. And we said, okay, he's versatile enough to maybe be a squad player, but in my opinion, he'd be nothing more than that, especially considering how much competition we have in the midfield right now. I mean, even at the 6, we've got Basuma, we've got Archie Gray, we've got Rodrigo Bentancur. At 8, we've got Pop Sarr, we've got Rodrigo Bentancur again, we've got Lucas Bergvall. And then at the 10, we've got Bergvall. At the 10, we've got James Maddison. At the 10, we've got Bentancur. So I just don't see the point in bringing in somebody who's, just going to add a 7th or 8th midfielder to the pecking order. And so underwhelming.
But is English, and that's like, obviously with homegrown quotas, makes him a little bit more valuable. Another midfielder from Burnley, Sander Berge. This is one that I hadn't really heard about, but Dakota brought it to our attention that there's been some scuttlebutt surrounding his name, and obviously a player that Premier League fans will know well. What are your 5 words or less on Berge?
2 words: overrated and complacent. Not a fan. I guess you could say not a fan and make 5 words, right? But I look, he was somewhat highly regarded, as one of the better Scandinavian players coming through the ranks 3 or 4 years ago. Ends up at Sheffield United, doesn't really do much. They get relegated. Ends up at Burnley, doesn't really do much. They get relegated. I have to be careful when I say this because we signed James Maddison right after the Leicester was relegated. But when a team is that bad, I'm not really interested in any of their midfielders because I think the midfield is the engine of and the heart of anything that happens. And yeah, I'm just not a huge Sander Berge fan, and I would be pretty underwhelmed by that signing.
I've given you 5 names so far, and you don't seem to be keen on really any of them, which I think is interesting because you're normally wanting to sign everybody and anybody. So let's see if we can get a hit here in these last couple of names. Let's go to Juventus and the forward Federico Chiesa, who there's been a lot of rumors about this name. Do you have a positive 5 words, or are we still going negative?
We finally got one that I'm all in on. So thank you. Yeah, my 5 words on Chiesa, it's actually 4 words, but dynamic, dribbly, versatile, and a winner. He's won the Euros with Italy as a starter. He has 2 Coppa Italias, a Super Coppa, if we want to count that, right? But ultimately, he has been an important piece of, a team that maybe hasn't played up to his standards over the last couple of seasons, but a team that demands winning. And again, he's been a very important piece of that team. But he can play as a wing back. He can play as a winger. He can play as a striker. And like I said, he's got a heap of trophies under his belt. He's got 5 or 6 significant trophies that he's won. And when you look at that, and then you consider the price that we're being quoted, sounds like 25-ish million or something like that. And then I look at a guy like Neto, who's been at Wolves. I'm all in on Federico Chiesa coming to Spurs, and it looks like that's probably going to happen.
We will see. It's so funny. Like, there's still a little over a month to go in the window, but the season starts obviously a little bit sooner than that. And I feel like fans have not yet reached the point where they're on edge about the lack of signings, because there have been a few that have trickled through, but they're just younger players who we don't think are the impacts. This would be one that I do think would be like, oh, this is an impact signing. So we'll see if it does come to fruition. A couple more names to get through here on the 5 words or less game. Let's go to Lille and Jonathan David. What are your 5 words on Jonathan David?
Fine is the first word. Poacher, finisher, affordable. I had 4 words, and then I'm gonna go off of what you said earlier and add a 5th/6th word that are hyphenated, but Richarlison light, and I think he is actually a Richarlison light when it really comes down to it. He's Canada's striker. He does have a league title under his belt at Lille when they famously won Ligue 1 against all odds, right? So we know that he can put the ball in the back of the net. Again, like I said, the word fine. I think I'd be fine with us signing him, but I don't think he gives us anything that Richarlison doesn't give us. So if we're looking to have 2 Richarlisons, then sure, go out and sign him. But I don't think he elevates our forward line to the level that's required at this point.
That's fair. I think the Richarlison light one would have been exactly where I went as well. It's like, okay, fine player, but is he taking the forward line to the next level? And also, I think there's something to be said about the fact that, if you go back a year when we talked about an Ange Postecoglou system, we all kind of realized then that the striker was, I don't want to say the least important part of the front line, but this is way more a system based on what the wingers and midfielders are cooking up, as well as the inverted fullbacks, rather than the striker. So maybe it's fine that this team doesn't have a Harry Kane level scorer in the striker position, which is what we saw, kind of the same type of role as Richarlison played. So maybe that is just fine, but it would be nice to have. I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't be nice to have a Harry Kane level scorer, It's not the kind of role that fits in the Postecoglou system. So maybe that's something to be said for these types of strikers that we're being linked to. Last name on the list. Let's go. Let's just go for it. Crystal Palace, Eberici Eze. This has been the name that has been extremely linked for many months, and I think a lot of people are in on Eze. What are your 5 words or less on Eze?
Yeah, proven, dynamic, versatile, English, and required. I think Eze is the one that has to get over the line. I think it's the one that takes us to the level that we need our attack to get to. He can play as a winger. He can play as a 10. I think that if you ask me if Eze or Chiesa was more important, as much as it hurts my Italian heart, I would say Eze is the one that we got to get in. We really need to get that done. He offers us so much on the field, and then again, being English, he would be important for our books and our off the field stuff as well. So I'm really keen on this one getting done as quickly as possible.
It's really interesting because dynamic is the word that I would have used as well. And I think that the dynamic nature of some of the players that we're bringing in is actually the most interesting part. I mean, we talked about it a lot with Bergvall. We talked about it with Archie Gray. These are players that we feel like can play in multiple roles. And I feel like Eze would be that type of player as well, where you can plug and play depending on opponent, depending on setup, depending on your tactics for that given week. You can stick a player. It's a lot of what we saw Dejan Kulusevski do last year, whether he was playing out on the wing, playing more centrally. We've seen it with Sonny. Sonny can play out on the wing. He can play through the middle. He can even step back into more of a creative role in midfield at times. It's maybe not the best use of his powers, but Eze to me is that type of player, and he kind of always has been. He works in a lot of different spaces on the pitch, and I think that would be, I think I agree with you. But again, the Chiesa one is really important too. If that could get over the line, but
yeah,
listen to me talking transfers. I don't really know, but I'm just excited for what the direction this club and as we kind of wrap this game, like the idea of all of these players is, just the fact that it's still so early in the window. I think people like freak out because the club has gone on tour, obviously, and like there's only a handful of new signings that got to join them on tour because only a handful of new signings have been made. But the fact that they're going to come back and still have ramp up time before the season, like this is a full, we still got a full month plus until the window actually closes. So a lot can still happen. And that's a lot of time in the world of transfers.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why we loaded up our preseason friendlies so heavily, is because of the Euros and because we knew there was no way around getting some of these big names in before the Euros had wrapped. And I don't even mean getting them in. I mean starting the process of getting them in before the Euros had wrapped. There's just no way you can do it. So if you give yourself a backloaded list of friendlies to play in, which we have, it gives guys that we should be bringing in a chance to bet in before week 1 of the Premier League. And like we just talked about, Eze and Chiesa, if we can get both of them in, I think we've had a great window and it could be job done, right? I think we're short up for the most part everywhere else, especially with Jed Spence looking like he's ready to be Pedro Porro's backup at the right wing back position, right? And allow Archie Gray to compete with Basuma. And I think on at left back, obviously we've got why am I drawing a blank on our world-class 21-year-old left back now?
Destiny Udogie.
Destiny Udogie, thank you very much. But we've got Ben Davies, who's going to be an important piece of the squad who can play there. It looks like Jamie Donnelly can play there pretty serviceably, right? So maybe that's one area where I'd like to see us invest in competition for Udogie, but I think that can come in the future, not this window, right? I think we're okay for now. So again, if we get Eze and Chiesa in, I think we're fairly ready for the Premier League. And I love a striker too, but we all know Sonny can play there as well as Richarlison. And if you get a Chiesa in, he can certainly play on the left side right away with Son up the middle. Most definitely can. He can invert. He can beat players to the byline. Eze can do the same thing. I think Eze probably inverts more than beats players to the byline. If we're talking a winger position, right? But he can play a 10 and compete with Madison and maybe earn more minutes than Madison. So you get those two guys in and we're ready to rock and roll. I do think they probably both walk straight into the first 11.
It'll be interesting to see. Lots to still be decided over the next month, but I'm excited about the direction. Look, I'm never the panic guy when it comes to this club needs to do more, but I certainly think there's still plenty of time, and I'm excited to see the direction in which it's headed. So good things all around. I want to, before we get out of here, touch on Spurs Women because it was a busy week, frankly. The manager got a new contract on the Spurs Women side of things. Robert Vilahamn signs a new deal through the 2027 season. I know that there's not really a whole hell of a lot to be said about this other than thumbs up and kudos to the club for getting this done. But I want to let you have your say on it because it's obviously a big deal.
Yeah, huge deal. I think, it says equally as much about Robert and the club. I think Robert was somebody who none of us were aware of before we brought him in as the first team manager for the women. And at that point in time, you're never quite sure what you're getting into, but we saw the foundation establish itself very quickly and progress rapidly throughout the season to an FA Cup final and our highest points tally in the Women's Super League to date. So he did a fantastic job. And I think this shows that just like on the men's side, we're heavily invested in a project under Robert. We've already talked about it a little bit, but Drew Spence was locked down to another couple of years, which I think is important as she will be a key factor, one of the older heads, right, amongst the squad to continue to, again, firm up that foundation and expand on that foundation. And I expect more things to happen in the near future from a transfer perspective for that team. I do think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but on the women's side, it's a really exciting time because if you're willing to invest and spend, it doesn't take much to bring in talent in comparison to the men's team, right? And everything's always relative, but I do think that the club is ready to spend and continue to build Robert's squad up, and that all starts with locking the manager down, right? You don't have a project until that happens, right? So I'm really happy that it's done, and just really excited to see what happens over the next couple of weeks, but more importantly, over the next 10, 11 months as Spurs Women prepare for believe a third, if not a fourth consecutive season in the Women's Super League. So exciting times.
I think the thing that's excited me so much about Robert Vilahamn since he came in a year ago is that he's really adopted the to dare is to do mindset of the club writ large. Yep. He's not settling for sticking around in the WSL, being mid-tier. He wants this club to get to the top of the WSL and to get into the Champions League and to do big things. His big quote that was posted in this article about his signing, quote, "We're going to develop players and create an environment that is amazing so we can be on top for a long time." And I just think that that's the mindset. That's the mindset to have. And this team has obviously brought in some big names, Bethany England, Martha Thomas. Like there are names being brought in and players making a name for themselves, even coming through the club, players like Jess Naz. And I think he is a really good person to foster that development and grow these players as a unit, and keep challenging for things, keep hitting those milestones that you see a club who got promoted and continued to grow, keep hitting those milestones. The first win over Arsenal last year, getting to that cup final, like these are all big milestones, and now he can continue to have those building blocks and continue to just to build a program. And it's really exciting to see. The other big WSL news this week was that fixtures were released. Spurs will open up the season at Brisbane Road against Crystal Palace the weekend of the September 21st and 22nd. That is the first WSL match of the season. They then go on the road to play at Aston Villa the following week. Full list is out. The first North London derby, the first crack at Arsenal will be a home match November 16th or 17th. And I would imagine that match will get moved to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium if the venue is available. We have not seen a list of games that are potentials to be moved to the big stadium yet, but as of now, all of them are listed for Brisbane Road. But just a exciting list of matches out, and again, the women's season does not start until late September, so still a lot more runway for them to climb. And the other interesting news from the WSL this week was that the FA player is no longer going to be used to stream WSL matches, which I found to be interesting and also kind of welcome news. The WSL matches are now going to be streamed on YouTube. There's a new WSL Barclays Women's Super League YouTube page that will stream non-televised matches. So that's kind of cool. I think that the FA player was a little bit of a pain to use. Now the FA player will still be needed for FA Cup matches. Those will still be streamed on the FA player, but for the WSL season, these matches are all going to YouTube, which I personally just find a easier website to use and easier way to stream games.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is there's an app. There's an app for that, and I will no longer have to HDMI my laptop into the TV to watch Spurs Women in the Women's Super League. Again, trivial and a first world problem we're highlighting for sure, right? But it will be super nice to be able to use the YouTube app on my smart TV or Xbox or whatever it is to be able to watch Spurs Women. So like you said, definitely a welcome change. And if anything, just shows the continued investment in women's football and making it more and more accessible for everyone.
I know that everybody kind of bristles at the fact that everything's going to streaming now, but when you make stuff free and on YouTube and just more available, it does have the opportunity to grow the game. And obviously we talked last week about the new Spurs Women deal with DAZN and just getting more free content out there, getting more visibility on the product, men's or women's. I mean, it's a good thing to get the product out there. That leads me to my maybe we'll make this a weekly segment, but the thing I want to bitch about most this week is, and this is going to be a little bit US centric, so to our international listeners, I apologize, but Peacock, the streaming app owned by the NBC Universal Group, is increasing its prices. And they announced this last week, just days before the start of the Summer Olympics in Paris, which Peacock exclusively has the rights to here in the United States. Peacock's prices are going up by $2 for monthly. They're going from $5.99 to $7.99 a month for their regular package, and the annual package, which is what I partake in because you save a little bit of money when you buy annually, is going up by $20 a year, from $119.99 to $139.99 for the Premium Plus tier. So all of us who need to stream games on Peacock for Premier League, you're going to be paying a little bit more this year. So that is something to note. It's so cheeky of them to do this the week of the Olympics, where they're literally all the live programming for Paris for the summer games these next few weeks. Everything live is on Peacock. They're pushing everybody, go to Peacock, watch it live on Peacock if you want to watch it live, because that's a big deal in the Olympics. Some people prefer to just watch the primetime prepackaged stuff that they have on network television on NBC or on USA Network in the evenings, and that's fine. I mean, I was doing a little bit of that the last few nights, but I watched the opening ceremony a little bit on Friday night, not live, just on tape delay, because it's whatever, it's the ceremony. But if you want to watch stuff live, everything's on Peacock, and you got to pay for that. And now they're increasing the price the week before the week of the Olympics starting. It's just I know it's a business, but it's pretty shady if you ask me, and I wasn't a huge fan of that announcement.
Yeah, it's indicative of the world we live in these days, especially from a corporatization and capitalism and just overall financial perspective, right? We continue to see prices on everything go up and up and up, and cost of living and supply chain, blah, 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 is always quoted as the reason why, but we all know that it's just corporate greed, and those at the top who are unwilling to make sacrifices really for the betterment of their organizations, right? It's not even about the consumer. They're unwilling to, again, take less of what is already just exponentially massive wages and earnings, right? So that they can maybe pay their staff and their employees more. But again, they don't want to give up that money out of their own pocket, so they push it on to the consumer. And it's frustrating until we all stop paying and watching, nothing will change, right? And that's kind of the catch-22 and the double-edged sword with all of this is I'm not going to not have Peacock. It's just something that I'm unwilling to do in making that sacrifice, which is, probably points to some of the fault being on the consumer as well, right? But it also puts us in a difficult position because we're passionate fans who care about our team. And for people like you and I, Tottenham Hotspur is a big part of our life and even our identity at times, right? And so companies like NBC, I don't want to say they give us no choice, but for all intents and purposes, give us no choice other than to bow to our corporate overlords so that we continue to watch the game that we love. And it's frustrating. Maybe
Game's
I'll run
gone,
for
man.
president and try to fix it.
There you go. Don't do it this cycle. I think it's a little that would be a little complicated. Might be a little messy if you try to do it this cycle. Oh man. But this is what it is. I will say, like, Peacock's done a pretty good job covering the Olympics the first few days.
Yeah.
Like the Gold Zone. I don't know if you've checked any
It's
of that
sick.
out. Like the bounce
been on my
around
TV
stuff.
all day, every day.
This again, a little bit more US centric of a conversation for the type of coverage we get of these things, but still I did want to talk about this just because I know we have a lot of US listeners, and if you didn't see that Peacock is increasing its prices, just know that if you subscribe to Peacock, well, I'm sure you got the email if you do, but like watching games on Peacock and having Peacock for the season is going to be a little bit pricier this season, and that's just something to note.
Yeah, and there's people like me. First of all, my family is a massive Olympics family. It's a highlight for us, and winter, summer, both. I'm a bigger fan of the Winter Olympics for sure, but the Summer Olympics are equally as awesome. And we're a big Olympics family, so it's on the TV all day, every day right now. There's also people like me who don't check their email and maybe don't pay as close enough attention to their financial statements as they should. And if you hadn't let me know, I probably would have just paid Peacock more this year and not known any better. So maybe thank you, but maybe also, why did you tell me?
It's like a thank you, but also fuck you situation, right?
Exactly. So
Fair,
yes, we will go with that. But yeah, all jokes aside, it is really frustrating, and I just hope that in some future we see better from these big corporations.
It's just the consolidation is going to happen eventually. I mean, this is way more of a topic that's been discussed on media podcasts and things like that. But like, eventually, this streaming bubble will probably pop, and everyone's going to go back to bundling things like we used to do. But that's a conversation for another day. I think that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Tottenham Depot podcast. Be sure to check out our episodes on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Tottenham Depot. You can leave us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice as well. It does help spread the word about the show. And I've seen a couple of people subscribing to the YouTube page. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And then the podcast episodes will just drop into your YouTube feed. That's the way it's done on the podcast app as well. So subscribe there. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, and TikTok at Tottenham Depot. And Scott is at Scott G. Bird. I am at A. Stedka. Until next week, this has been the Tottenham Depot podcast. As always, come on, you Spurs.